In a world where high-performance, zero-defect buildings are hard to find, two men are on a mission to disrupt the status quo. Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the Property Design and Development Podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and unofficial mediator, here again with my colleague, official agitator, friend, and Yoda of most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Yoda.
Hello, Yoda.
For today's episode, we're going international with global discussions on architecture, engineering, energy, and the indoor environment, and frankly, really the future of humanity in the built environment with our very special guest, Dr. Bjarne Olesen, who I think is calling in from Cyprus, if I believe. He'll tell us that here in a second. Bjarne earned his Ph.D. in heating and air conditioning in 1975 and a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering in 1972. Both degrees obtained from the Technical University of Denmark. Today he is the director of the International Center for Indoor Environment and Energy and a professor at the Danish Technical University. Bjarne is an ASHRAE Fellow and also ASHRAE's current president for the 2017-2018 term. Olesen had previously served on the board of directors as the treasurer, vice president, and director at large. Welcome to the show, Bjarne.
Thank you.
So, Professor, it's really hard to do an introduction worthy of your influence around the world. So let's just stick with your ASHRAE presidential theme, which is extending our community with a focus on three directives: extend ASHRAE's global community, extend the technological horizons, and extend the value to members. And for the decades that I've observed your work within and outside of ASHRAE, and also having worked with you on an award-winning journal article along with Professor Kim, a good friend of yours from Seoul, Korea, you really have been living your presidential theme for a good part of your career. At least that's what I've seen. So tell our audience your story. How'd you get to be the president of ASHRAE?
Well, it took me like 41 years to become president of ASHRAE. But there is a fast track. You don't have to wait that many years to become president. But already when I was studying, probably when I was working on my master in 72 and during my PhD, 74 and 5, I was introduced to ASHRAE because I was working related to thermal comfort and the influence on the indoor environment on people. And there ASHRAE kind of had a leading role. The publications in this area was often made at ASHRAE conferences, and ASHRAE had its own lab to do investigations. And that time it was in Kansas State University. And my professor, he had spent 1 year in the US to do a lot of studies with human subjects, and which formed the basis for his doctoral thesis. So we had visitors who were involved in ASHRAEs, like Professor Ralph Nevins and Gaggy from Yale University. So it was quite natural that my Professor Fanger, he asked me when I finished my PhD to go to ASHRAE, send a paper, and give a presentation. And that's how it started in 1977, Halifax, Nova Scotia, my first ASHRAE meeting.
So I have to, for our audience, I have to put a pin in something you just said there. So Dr. Fanger, yes, famous for many things to do with our business. Could you just give our listeners a bit of a background on him? Because I'm aware of him because I'm old, right? But I don't think generations after me realize his impact and significance on our industry.
Well, I think his doctoral thesis and what he worked at was to try to, for thermal comfort, try to put all the parameters together to show the relative influence. So he basically, which has been known, I guess, for years, that comfort is depending on both the clothing you wear and how hard you work. And then the temperatures, both air temperature, radiant temperature, humidity, and velocity. And we have known that for years, and there has been studies looking at the temperature influence on people's comfort. But there has never been a kind of method to integrate all this into like one index or one value for the indoor environment. There has been some attempt to make something like effective temperature where you combine humidity and temperature. So in his studies, he kind of went out from the heat balance of the human body, which is essential for comfort, but it's not enough for comfort because you can be in heat balance when you are sweating a lot. It's not comfortable. You can be in heat balance when you're shivering. That's also not comfortable. So there are some more criteria to it. So he looked at how to establish the heat balance, which equation goes into it. But then he also did a lot of studies to expose people to different combinations of the parameters and get their subjective response. And in this way, he developed an index for the indoor environment called a predicted mean vote. So he established this index which integrate all the parameters for comfort. And from when he made his doctoral thesis was in 1970. I worked with him since 1969. It took about 8 years. Then we established an ISO standard that kind of standardized it. And a couple of years later, it was included in the ASHRAE Standard 55, also as a method.
So Bjarne, I want to draw our attentions to the audience just how significant this is, because Fanger's PhD thesis was turned into a book. And yes, that book was published by two publishers. One, the Danish Technical University, which is where you were at.
That was the first one, yes.
Yeah. And then I think McGraw-Hill did another one. And McGraw-Hill actually screwed up the publication, so we're not even going to talk about that one. We'll talk about the one from the Danish Technical University. Because today, and this is really important, today, and it depends on, the sort of the supply demand, but today you can search online for that book and you might have to pay anywhere upwards of around $500 to $600 US for that publication. Wow. It's not an easy book to get. They come up every once in a while, but you don't want to buy the McGraw-Hill version. You want to buy the DTU version. It's the red colored one. So that's a pretty heavy price for a PhD thesis. One of the most expensive ones I know of.
Well, I should say it was not a PhD thesis. It was a doctor thesis. He didn't make a PhD, but you can make later on in your career a doctoral degree. So it was not the traditional PhD. It was a doctor degree, a doctoral thesis. And that's often a book you come out with.
Okay. That's a good piece of information.
I have both versions on my desk. So
yeah, so do I. I paid big bucks for the McGraw-Hill one, and I got ripped off. So what it is, yeah, well, you're well connected. You knew the guy, so
yeah. I was his first PhD student.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, for our listeners, this would be like Benjamin Graham and Warren Buffett working together, right?
Yeah.
That would be the financial equivalent. This is significant, man. This is very significant. And I just remember being on trains as a young sort of technician running around London, reading my ASHRAE journal, and they were periodically publishing his work, building up to the ASHRAE standard. And it was fascinating for me because I'm a total nerd. But, I think that piece of work will impact our business for years and years to come, right? Because that standard's not going away. It's only going to evolve and get better, right? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I know. I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about this is that, we could go so many places with you, Professor. And, we've already skipped over your career coming out of university. And so, Adam, I want to come back because Bjarne has some interesting stuff that he did after he got out of school.
Right. But
the controversy on thermal comfort still exists. And you actually replied with ASHRAE to a publication, I think it was 2 years ago, a research project that came out that, and we hear this over and over again, that ASHRAE 55 is restricted to middle-aged men, office workers wearing a suit, which is not right, or that it's a very narrow band that we have to function in. And neither of those statements are true.
Right.
So Adam, and you talked about this will be a document or documents that will last really forever. I can't ever see why they would drop it. But the controversies, of course, will keep coming up every once in a while. So Bjarne, why? I mean, we've done all this research work, we continue to do research work, but there's still controversy. Why?
Well, there's still, especially thermal comfort. Many people have their own opinion, anecdotal experiences, which are based on 1 and 2 or 3 people. And for thermal comfort, between individuals, there's big differences. But if you go to average of groups, there's not that big difference in what we want and what we prefer. And I think that's some of the controversy, that people have their own experience, which may be right. But if you look at the average population, we have a lot of knowledge. But now and then, and I think sometimes, especially during the last 5 years, 6 years, there has been some interest in saying, well, maybe the comfort zone that we normally talk about is too narrow. It can probably be extended by allowing high air velocities and other things, which to a certain degree may be acceptable. But I think, and now we're talking about ASHRAE 55, that we are going a little too far. I think people forget, and that's something we have not really taken into account in ASHRAE 55, that there is a thing called productivity. And we know, especially both when the temperature is too high and too low, we lose productivity.
Right.
And the productivity in an office, 1% loss of productivity is the same as the whole energy budget.
Wow. Say that again. Say it again. Yeah. 1% loss of productivity
is the same as the whole energy budget. So when we look upon the expenditure you have in an office, what you spend to pay people's salary or insurance to work there is 100 times bigger as the energy cost.
So that's crazy.
So that clearly shows we should not save energy by sacrificing the indoor environment. And that's, I have felt a little the last 5-10 years we have to fight for.
I see what you're saying there, because I feel the focus is on energy because it's easily understood, it's less subjective, it's more quantifiable, right? And it fits rules of thumb. So I think what's going on with ASHRAE 55 and the difficulty in its mass adoption is there's a Nash equilibrium, there's a game theory, there's an equilibrium between the supply chain and the engineers doing the rule of thumb design and the industry that's not willing to pay for proper design, right? There's this equilibrium in existence. And until a user sort of demands design for them based on productivity or subjective criteria, like how do I feel? I suppose the housing market might be is the housing market the better market to push ASHRAE 55 further? Because that's where the owner has primacy.
Well, yes, but especially with the housing market, where you now are not talking maybe on an average person, but on the individual who's going to live there.
Yeah,
this person will, of course, like to set whatever the thermostat and others so it fulfills his or her needs. Where when you are in office building, you more have to look at the kind of average of people. So I think in the housing, the important thing is to provide the user with the possibility of establishing, for example, a temperature within a given range. So we have to make sure when we design the heating that the minimum of what we normally regard as a comfort range can be obtained. The minimum temperature can be obtained at the design outdoor temperature for winter. And again, part of the comfort range should be obtained in a summer day. Then we don't have any control. That's what we as designer can provide for the housing, and we can guarantee them that that's obtainable. Whatever they put the temperature at can be quite different, and that's up to their own preference.
Yeah.
Where when we go in the office, everybody cannot go and change the thermostat there. Normally, we would like to find some kind of average if you don't have a single office. If you have a single office, you are back to individual control again.
I mean, one of the arguments and we were in Washington a few years ago, I guess, Bjarne, for the Residential Building Committee workshop. Yes. And one of the arguments that I made is that in the public world, the language that they use to describe comfort is something that they're born with. They know what cold is, they know what hot is, they know what draft is. You don't have to go to school to learn about comfort. You have those words. It's part of your DNA. But you have to go to school to learn about energy and fenestration and U values and thermal conductivity. Like the words go on and on and on. And I think one of the problems that we have in the community of engineers is we tend to use our engineering language within the public realm rather than their language. And, I'm sitting here in downtown Calgary. I'm looking at hundreds of office buildings. Inside each of those buildings, of course, are people. And they don't have energy complaints. They have comfort complaints. I think it behooves the engineering community to start to use the language of our customers and not force them to learn our language. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, certainly. But I don't think so when we have people in an office or when we have at home, I don't think we explaining to people a lot about comfort and that there is difference between people. It's not uncommon that they can discuss about what is the right temperature. They don't agree on the same temperature and they're both right. Because we prefer...
two different things can be right at the same time.
Yes, and we don't explain people in an office, for example. We have here a landscaped office and we set the thermostat about a certain degree, but you may have different opinion. The way you can do it, you can try to adapt your clothing. We never tell them that. That's the way they can get more comfortable without disturbing the others. A certain minimum clothing we need, of course. And in housing, when you buy a house, you don't get any instruction how to operate the house and what you can do for your own comfort. There's no guideline. When you buy a small electronic thing, you get like 5 pages of instruction, but not when you have a house. So I think we can avoid a lot of dispute or comfort problem if we explain people a little more what's all about. And we can explain them in their language about cold and warm and so on.
I do know that from our own research work that we do at conferences is that 97, and this is a statistic that has held true now for over 15, almost 20 years now, 15, 18 years, that 97% of the industry, that is engineers, architects, builders, manufacturers, are illiterate when it comes to thermal comfort. If you're in a room with 100 engineers and you ask them how many people know of the standard, most of them do. But if you ask how many people are actually conversant in the standard, maybe 3%. It's very, very low. Why is it that a standard that ASHRAE published in 1966 has such a low amount of people aware of it?
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I have a good explanation on it. I think, well, interesting enough, there's probably been more focus on the standard for indoor air quality and ventilation, 62.1.
Yeah.
And that's probably because people think with the indoor air quality and ventilation, there is a health risk. But they don't think with the thermal environment, thermal comfort, it's only comfort. There's no health risk.
Yep.
Of course, there is a health risk if you go to extreme. We had a lot of people dying, a heat wave in Paris in 2003. I don't know how many people died because of the thermal. But normally people think it's comfort. Well, we shouldn't be so much concerned about comfort. We should be concerned about health.
Yeah.
But if you look, when you look at standard 62.1, the required ventilation rate is mainly based on comfort also.
That's interesting. I got my own theory on your question, Robert. So mine is that, and it's normally set by how ASHRAE standards are wrapped into building code or adopted via legal cases. So, for instance, minimum indoor air quality has had legal cases and has had legal precedent, and it's wrapped up in OSHA legislation, right? And then building code, certain ASHRAE standards have sort of been adopted or co-opted into building codes in certain parts of the world. because standard 55 is a lot more subjective, and it's hard to sue because I don't feel comfortable. It's easy to sue because I've been made ill, or I've been hurt, but it's hard to sue because I get hot and cold. This is the whole problem with our industry, right?
Yeah.
No one dies from being hot or cold unless there's a heat wave or it's super extreme. But, if you're a structural engineer and you screw up the I-beam calculation, that can have some consequences, right?
So I totally agree with where you're going with that. But let me throw this out for you, that if you hire a lawyer for commercial law cases, that your expectation is that they would understand the laws around that case. If you were to hire an accountant, that you would expect that he would understand the standard of care around the accounting principles. If you hire a physician, that he would understand the standard of care or practice for the services that you're looking for. Why is it that we have an industry where the standard of care is thermal comfort? Like when people design buildings, it's for comfort, that people don't know the standard. We would never accept that in any other profession.
That's crazy.
Yes, that's right. And what people don't know is people's thermal comfort is more important. That's where you have most complaint. If you look about indoor air quality, first of all, people adapt very easily to a certain smell in the space. Within 10, 15 minutes, you have adopted. People don't have the same sense for when the ventilation is not enough. The reason why people open windows is often to cool down because of temperature, not because of the air quality.
Yeah.
Because the main driver in 90% of the cases, maybe 95, is the comfort of air quality. That is the perceived air quality, the smell of other people.
Yeah.
And in few cases, it's some criteria for health that will trigger the amount of ventilation. But that's a few cases. But I think a lot of people don't really realize that. And the basis for some of the ventilation limit is subjective studies, where also a certain percentage of people, they felt the air was smelly. And that's why we established the ASHRAE indoor air quality standard, saying one criteria is that more than 80% should be satisfied. And we use that criteria to come up with that minimum.
Yeah. So I want to sort of take it up to a bit of a macro level now. So you're a European as the head of a very august and large American engineering institution. So I've personally had the good fortune to work in over 20 countries, and the differences between engineering cultures fascinates me. And I guess you must be seeing that, right? So what's it like being a European heading up an American organization? Because there are some very clear cultural differences between American design and other parts of the world, in my opinion. How do you see that?
Well, how should I say? Well, I think we definitely can learn from each other. But one thing that I have seen is that there's not one part of the world which are the best in everything.
Correct.
We can definitely learn from each other. And sometimes, but that has changed in ASHRAE. I remember when I came on the board for 10 years ago, we talked about being global, ASHRAE being global. But the attitude was at that time more than that being global would be like everybody else should do like ASHRAE is doing. And that's not the way you become global. And that has changed completely.
Right.
Now the board and people, the leadership understand it's being collaborating with people. It's a two-way exchange. We can learn from each other. You see, the world got air conditioning from the US. We got VRF systems from Japan.
Yeah.
We got radiant heating and cooling from Europe. And ASHRAE can play a good role because we have members everywhere. So we can play a role to get the knowledge about technologies from different parts of the world much faster into our handbooks or our publications, to our learning and so.
So go on, you, Robert.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Bjarne, having the background that you have, I mean, you've seen the industry evolve around the world, really. I mean, you've seen it evolve in North America, you've seen it evolve in Europe and in Asia. If you were to look into your crystal ball, where would you see HVAC systems in 10, 20 years from now? Will we see greater adoption of radiant in North America, for example? What will happen with VRF and all of this refrigerant that seems to run everywhere in buildings, which concerns many people? Yeah. So what do you see happening?
Well, our industry is very conservative, so there will be no big steps going on. Also, we are conservative. I experienced that from radiant heating and cooling, that even if it has been used in a lot of buildings in Europe, you may not believe it in the US before you have tried it in the building in the US. So I think many consultants, they are conservative. They know what they have done until now and it has worked. And our business is not a risky business. Nobody wants to take the risk. So the development is slow, but of course there will be development. I think there will be more radiant heating and cooling in North America. But radiant heating and cooling is not the answer to everything. The important is to look at what is the type of building, what climate zones are you in. So it's not like there's one system that is the solution.
Yeah,
it's really looking on a case by case.
So I'd like to challenge you a little bit on, it's not necessarily a challenge actually, but when an engineer does what he does because he's comfortable with it, and the word is because it works. But if you look at, the CBE published a paper here recently where they looked at over a 10-year period, I think 365 buildings, I think over 56,000 people participated in the thermal comfort surveys. Mm-hmm. Only anywhere between 2 and 17% compliance with ASHRAE 55. So when we say it works, what exactly is working? Because from the customer or the client or the occupant's point of view, there's failure at a very high rate.
Yes. Well, we can take an example like ASHRAE meetings.
They're never comfortable, ever.
No, so what I have experienced is when I go to the winter meeting, I have to wear my short sleeve shirt and no jacket inside. When I come to my summer meeting, I always wear a jacket because it's so cold. And the problem is here's not the standards, because the standards are saying you should have higher temperatures inside in summer than in winter. But it's the operation. I think a lot of places, our system is operated, and the operator may not know anything about what was the design value, what standard was used. Because the standard, I think the ASHRAE standard is okay, but we don't follow it as the ASHRAE meeting when we set the thermostat.
Actually,
and that goes back.
Yeah. People should also know that Bjarne also rocks a mean bow tie. So do you wear the bow tie with your shorts too, or do you just the suit?
No. I have never had bow ties with my short now.
Actually, that was a very astute observation you just made, because it's the application, right? It's the run-in operation application of even if something is averagely designed out of a catalog, you can still apply it better. You could have an outside air reset to moderate the temperature inside. There's so many things you can do that are really low cost, no cost, right? There's like a skill and knowledge deficit at the end of a job, that gap between the end of the job and the operation of the building. There's like a skill and knowledge deficit, but I'm a big fan of outside air reset. So if it's 40 degrees outside, it doesn't have to be 21 degrees inside, right? It can be 26, 27 and still be fantastic. Yeah. So, I don't know.
No, I know operation is a big problem. Let's say the follow-up of the design and to really verify that it works, which takes more than a year. The first year of building, you still have to fine-tune it and so on. But normally at that point, there's no money anymore. Yeah. And you don't use the time for it. So we need, I think we need stricter codes for operation of building. Commissioning should go a little longer than not just by handover, but the next 1 or 2 years after.
Yeah.
But I know that will be one of the themes, one of the emphasis of ASHRAE with the president coming in 1.5 years from now, or a year from now. Wow. That will be on operation of buildings.
Oh, that's interesting, because we were speaking to the president of the Royal Institute of Surveyors. I'm just name dropping now, last episode. And the president that's going to follow him is from the Facilities Management faculty. So there seems to be a lot of emphasis going on to operational stuff, which is correct in my opinion.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan. I'm trying to coin a saying, which is evidence-based design and evidence-based performance. And I think that is going to become a reality in the medium or even short term, because it's the cost to monitor and quantify performance is falling, in my opinion.
Yes.
And that is going to make the difference. It's going to be easy to see who's done a good job, who's not, who's swimming, who's drowning. The whole thing's going to become very transparent. And then there's going to be some consequences, and consequences lead to change. So I'm very optimistic on the future on the basis that building performance is going to become very visible going forward.
Yeah, with all the sensors building into the systems and so on, and all wireless, you can get so much information. So you can have a continuous maintenance or continuous commissioning of the building just by the measurement you do. You don't have to have people come out and use 2 weeks to do a lot of measurement. You have them all available. And that's where we can learn from the car industry.
Yes,
the car calculates when it's time to do service and where there's something wrong, and we will see that. And that's a part of this big data or Internet of Things, where we can make it useful in operation of buildings.
I'm totally on board with that stuff, and we've had some good discussions with some other guests on it. My red flag is that the manufacturers are marketing machines. And so the marketing machines of internet technology, does that become a priority rather than fixing the building? In other words, if people think that they can solve problems with technology before fixing the building, we've actually created more problems. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
The problem is the building, and it's architectural, it's building enclosure design, it's interior design, it's all of the professions, the lighting guys, the thermal comfort guys, HVAC. Solving these problems with technology just seems to me like smoke and mirrors. We have fundamental problems to fix first before technology.
Yeah, but I think, so the main focus, or the focus should be, and I think that's definitely a focus we have in Europe, it is to decrease the demand. To decrease the demand for energy, and that means basically also decrease the demand for technology. So, and that goes back to, if you can decrease the demand, you solve a lot of problems with the refrigerants, because you don't have to use refrigerants. And it may be easier for you to do cooling without refrigerants. And to do that, it just means different partners, engineers and architects have to work together from the beginning. But I see many places that trend. I see it especially in Japan. I've just been in Japan visiting construction companies and others. And the big design companies, they have both many architects, many engineers in the company working together at the same time. So I think definitely we see a trend. I know also one of the biggest architectural company in Denmark, they have now hired 3 engineering PhDs, which is unusual. But I think there is a trend. And that, of course, will help in that problem, that we don't try to solve things but just putting in more technology. But we try from the beginning to use as little technology as possible by optimizing everything.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think, our listeners should understand that between the three of us, there's probably close to a couple hundred years of experience here. And I can probably...
Are you 2/3 of that, or are you half of that?
I could probably say that we've all been up the high-tech ladder and probably fell off of it, knowing that simple is good.
The Edifice complex will continue in just a moment. If you're enjoying this podcast, we need your help. We're not asking for money, just a minute of your time. Our goal is to make the Edifice Complex podcast as relevant, educational, and useful as possible. By having good ratings, we can reach the widest audience. Therefore, our request is two small things. If you haven't already, leave us a review and rating on iTunes. And subscribe to the Edifice Complex on YouTube, even if you normally only listen to the audio version. These two things will help us immensely. Also, if you would like Robert or Adam to speak, teach, or consult on your project or business, please email admin@edificecomplexpodcast.com. Thanks for your time, and now back to the show.
To take the point, integrated design, I think, is the solution. The Apple solution is what you're looking for, right? Someone owns the whole widget. They're responsible for design top to bottom. But to take your point, Robert, about technology, it could become a bit of a greenwashing. If the monitoring technology is good enough, it ultimately has to expose bad performance, right? And that in itself, you get an aggressive lawyer involved in that, a couple of cases and everyone's scared and everything changes, right?
Well, there is a case out there now, with a very popular thermostat, begins with N, looks a lot like the old round one, where the performance claims never materialized. And of course, people have taken that to task and have hired lawyers to address that. And so we see that where people get sucked into the technology. And part of that, it has to do with utilities, right? So utilities are selling their services and they entice people to buy the contracts by throwing in technology. You get our favorite red colored round high-tech thermostat. And, and it's all about energy and comfort, and they put it in and they find out they don't save any money and the building just as uncomfortable as it was before. Yeah,
I agree. I think it starts out as a prophylactic, but it ends up being like the fifth columnist within. It ultimately exposes what's going on, right? And that's a great example. If you've got a crappy building, having a very nice digital thermostat on the wall doesn't actually do you a lot, really.
No. And sometimes what's behind the thermostat, very sophisticated control, you can do everything. And the weakest point is the thermostat and the position of the thermostat in the space.
Yes.
So what I would like to see in the future, that parts of the control loop is people.
Yes.
Now everybody has a smartphone or sitting at a PC. So why don't we ask them twice a day how they feel? They are the ones who know the best. And integrate that in what should the system do?
Yeah, that's
together with measurement they have on the different system parts. But just to get people feeling.
Actually, that is a great idea because that becomes an algorithm, right? With real-time input.
Yeah.
Yes. That is awesome. I like that a lot. See, you learned something on this. I learned that. I like that. I'm going to steal that. So Robert,
so what are you holding up there?
Robert's holding up.
I just got back from spring camp, and this was from Saint Gobain. You're familiar with
Saint Gobain? Yes.
Yeah, and they gave me one of these sensors, and it's a room sensor. It's got light, sound, temperature, and humidity. And you press the power button, and it connects right with your cell phone, just like you said, Bjarne. So these two marry up, and then you can open up the app and you can feed back information. And they're handing these things out like bags of chips.
So is that a trend? Is it a trend logger basically? You put it on, and you can trend log.
No, it's not a trend logger. It's a point in time. But the app you can keep providing feedback. So I agree. These are simple, low cost things, and I don't know what the accuracy is of them. They're nowhere near as accurate. Going back to your early career, you worked for B&K.
Yeah.
Didn't you, developing sensors? So I probably not as accurate as that, but still,
Hey,
yes.
Yeah.
There's nothing more inaccurate than a pneumatic thermostat, right? And there used to be millions of them everywhere. So, yes, I'm old. So, sorry, go on, Rob. You go.
Well, I have so many questions. That's
same here.
Yeah, and I know, Bjarne, it's late there, and you probably want to go to bed because
I'm fine.
I almost hate to bring up the word because it's such a interesting word, but I'm going to do it anyways, and that has to do with exergy.
Oh yes,
dum dum dum.
Now you lost half of the audience. Maybe 80%.
I know, and that's the danger of talking about this. But can you maybe find a way to explain to our audience why that word and why those principles are so important to sustainability and really to the existence of mankind? It's an incredible word.
But yeah, exergy is a way of taking into account the value of energy. And what we do with exergy is saying, we're not only saying how much energy, but we're also saying, taking into account what I said, the value. So if you have something at a temperature of 100 degrees C, you can use it for many things. If you have the same energy as 25 degrees, it may be the same energy content.
Yeah.
You cannot use it for so many things. So it's a kind of low-valued energy. But if you can use a low-valued energy that has also what we call low exergy, then you will save. You can save emissions to the world, and you would really. How should I say it? You will use less environmental resources if you could use all the low-valued energy, and we have a lot of it. But to use low-valued energy depends on what system you have. If you have a heating system, small radiators which need 70 degrees supply temperature, and you only have energy available at 26 degrees, then you cannot use that. But then you have another system, large surfaces where this may be enough. So, and by exergy, an analyzed system using exergy, you can get a kind of value for taking that into account. The problem is, when you write it in a paper, often I get back and say there is a misspelling here. It's saying exergy, it should be energy. And it's only few people who really works with it. It turns out, back one of my postdocs, he's doing a lot with exergy.
Yes, Ogen.
Yes, and he's working together with one of my Japanese colleagues who even have made exergy analysis for the human body.
At the Sakuro?
Sukuya.
Sukuya.
Sukuya, yes.
Yeah.
Try to show at certain environmental temperature, the exergy consumption, exergy use of the human body is less, so we should put less strain on the human body. But mostly it's used to analyze system. In the chemical industry, it's used a lot to analyze a system and to optimize system. We are not using it so much in the HVAC area. There is certain people who work with that. We have ASHRAE, also have a committee working with it. But as one of my other ASHRAE colleagues are saying, as long as people pay for energy and not for exergy, it will not really be interesting for people. But we could put prices on exergy instead of energy.
Yeah, return on exergy, right? And this is a really important topic. And so just avoiding the technical part of it, what people need to understand is that when you take, say, for example, a barrel of oil out of the ground and you use that for combustion purposes, and if we turn it into, say, 1700 degrees Celsius or 3400 degrees Fahrenheit, you can't put that back into the barrel. Once you've ignited it, it's gone. And so if your building only needs 40 degrees C or 30 degrees C, but you're generating 1700 degrees C, that difference is gone forever. We can't put it back. So that means that it's a very selfish act to take such high quality energy and use it for a low industrial purpose like heating buildings.
Yes.
And that's the sustainable argument, is that we're taking away from future generations the ability to generate high temperatures for industrial purposes because we want to use it for non-industrial applications.
See, humans are terrible at thinking long-term. We are short-term animals. We are short-term thinkers, right? The only way I have found ever sell exergy as a concept is when I wrapped it up with comfort, strange enough. Do you see what I'm doing here? Joining all these dots? You like that? So I used to do some presentations on sustainable building design. So I'd say radiant systems, who uses them? This is North American audience. No one would stick their hand up. And someone stuck their hand up once and said, oh, that's dangerous new technology. So I said, the Romans used it. How is that new? Was my first question. But then then I explained, about if you have the surface area of a 60-watt bulb, you can't touch it. Whereas if that's over a wider surface area, you can. So we're talking about the heat and energy content, right? Mm-hmm. So then I get into, okay, well, if you have radiant heating, yes, you're in a low exergy system. You could use solar thermal, certainly where I live in Toronto, and you can be more comfortable and you can be super trendy and so that appeals to short-term thinking. The only way I could sell that concept was on short-term comfort and short-term I've got it and therefore I'm awesome and the other people are not. That's the only way I could sell the concept of radiant heating, but that was also a way to sell low exergy systems. So I managed to get the low exergy conversation in my presentation that way, but boy, it was a struggle. And it took me a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, if it's good enough for the Romans, who were engineers with spears, it's good enough for me.
Well, there were people who were long before the Romans.
Yes.
In the Chinese part of the world, they
were light years ahead. Now, I want to just to change the conversation a little bit because you are an important person in our world. My daughter's just graduated with an engineering degree, and her cohort are so unimpressed with our industry. There are not enough words in the English language to describe how unimpressed they are with building services engineering. Some of them would rather flip burgers than go into our business. And ASHRAE is one of the few organizations, I think, that could impact that opinion. Now, I'm not saying you've got to shoot your car into space and become Elon Musk, but, that guy's got some razzmatazz, right? Somehow, I think ASHRAE and other institutions like them have to somehow speak to these younger people, right, and get them excited about the industry. How do we do that?
Well, yes, and that has been one of the topic when I have been around the world, that how do we get more of the young people interested in our industry?
Yeah.
Well, ASHRAE is doing, I think ASHRAE is doing a lot. First of all, we have these student branches, which are at the engineering college, and we have been very successful with that worldwide. I think we have about 12,000 student members now.
Fantastic.
And we attract them also by having scholarships and when they are student members, at a very low rate. But we have to get them interested even before they go into universities. And that's a little harder. But in ASHRAE, we have like a STEM program where we ask some ASHRAE members volunteer to go to the schools and talk with the teacher in physics and mathematics and saying, we can go in one of your classes and show them something what engineers are doing. So we have like a set of things that can be used in just demonstrations. And that's probably where it's needed to get them interested in engineering. We just had a meeting in Brussels here 1 month ago, and ASHRAE have something called the Associate Society Alliance, where we have societies from all over the world who meet at our winter meeting. And I'm in the process, I want to make a global alliance. And one of the issues here we discussed was, how can we make our industry much more attractive? How can we show the world how important our industry is? Because I always say we are responsible for 40% of the energy use. We are responsible for a good indoor and healthy indoor environment. But many people don't see that. So we need to market ourselves much better. And I think people will see the importance that we save lives many places. But we have not been good at marketing ourselves. So that will definitely be something that ASHRAE would like to work on, and especially when we make this global alliance together with society all over the world, because it's a little the same all over the world.
Yeah, I think ASHRAE is, just taking the ASHRAE example, the way I would reposition ASHRAE is people want to know the why, right? Why should I do this? Why are we doing this? And the why is, we live with an economic model based on infinite growth, and we live on a planet with finite resources, right? So the challenge is, how do we keep the comfort levels and economic growth we have without depleting all our resources, right? That's a big why. And the other thing is, why can't things be excellent? They don't have to be average or bad, right? Speak to their, not saving the world, that's a bit too Bruce Willis in Armageddon, but speak to their, it's like a calling. It needs to be a calling, a duty. I want to impact that situation. I want to, so you're looking for people who want to make the difference to resource depletion, moving the needle on technology. It can be a sexy business, right? It can be about innovation. It can be about technology. It's about problem solving. It's about comfort. It's about serving society. Engineers are in service of society. That's what I was always taught. But I think that message has sort of been lost a little bit over the years. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair here. But I don't know. I'm getting old when I think about this stuff.
I mean, one of the challenges that we have is, think about this. I mean, Adam, you've had companies where you had to hire somebody.
Yeah.
And so you're across the table and you're, sizing up this individual in terms of their personal skills, their technical skills, blah, blah, blah. And if that person is capable enough, then we bring them to our side of the desk and they become part of our team. One of the challenges I see that we have in the industry is that we, the leaders in the industry, rely a lot of our communication, our messages, through people who we would never actually have on our team. And what I'm talking about is individuals that are actually, oftentimes these are the face-to-face individuals with clients. So they're more interested in how to put things together. I'm talking about trades, for example, than they are about the why. We don't teach them the why because they don't need to know the why. All they need to know the how. And so when we're looking for people who need to know why and how, we hire them on our side, but we don't do a very good job of teaching the how part of our industry why.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, actually. The why is important, but it's never spoken about, right? Because everyone's in survival mode, get through the day. Yeah, right. That's a really important takeaway, actually, for me. Why the why matters.
Right. So if we're gonna allow, if the HVAC contractors are going to be our voice, because ultimately they're one of the people, the part of our industry that has that face-to-face contact. If we're going to rely on them to be our voice, then we have to train them and teach them about our voice.
I like that. There's a TED Talk in there somewhere. We got to dig it out.
Yeah.
So again, being unfair to you here because you are the global head of this massive organization, so obviously you can fix everything with a flick of your fingers, right?
Yes.
Not.
Still one month, yes.
That's what I used to think when I was 18 and looking at like people like President ASHRAE saying, the power, they must be able to do everything. And then as you get older, you realize it's just a committee process. And it's like, it's as you say, it's sitting in cold conference rooms, right? Talking about meeting minutes. Listen, we're coming up on the hour now, so I'd like to sort of wrap things up a little bit. Being president of ASHRAE, I don't want to make light of that. That is a very serious business and it's a very important job. And, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with about that and how ASHRAE can make a difference?
Well, to be president, the main thing in the year where you are president is that you get more engaged with the whole world. Now, for me, that may not have been so big a change because I have been engaged with the whole world for a lot of my time. But for example, for many presidents from the US, that's an experience where they see the whole world and they see we have ASHRAE members in the whole world. And the interesting thing is that all these ASHRAE members mainly want the same, to make a better life for people and make the world better. So the ASHRAE role is when we look at it, when the global world look at ASHRAE, what I have experienced this year is, on the one hand, most of the world still regard ASHRAE as the American society. So there have been many questions like, yeah, but what if the US government, they don't want to be part of the Paris Agreement and the Kigali? Where does that leave ASHRAE? But I always told them ASHRAE is not involved in politics, and I think on the contrary, ASHRAE is doing even more for making building more sustainable with our products, with our zero energy design guides, and in fact the same is happening in the US in many states and many governors. So the rest of the world do not have to be afraid that the US is not focused anymore on saving energy or that kind of things. To be ASHRAE president, for me, coming from Denmark, has helped a lot to make ASHRAE more global, or show the world that we are global. That has been a big benefit for me coming from outside North America, as an indication of that we really want to be more global. And I think I have changed things in the more global direction during this year.
Bjarne, ASHRAE was started how long ago? I mean, it was ASVE before it became ASHRAE.
Yeah, there were two organizations.
Yeah, and so when was the very first organization? I'll come to my point here in a second. Well, when was the very first organization established? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's next year. It's 125 years ago.
So the current, for our international listeners, the current administration in the U.S. will last a period of 4 years. That's 4 out of 125 years. So,
yes, maybe.
Yeah, if it lasts that long. So the message there is that what you're seeing really is just a blip in time that will get corrected.
Yeah, and it has not had that big impact on our industry.
Right.
I think on the contrary, many have stepped up and wanted to show the world outside the US that we are serious about energy use and lower emission to the world.
Yeah, and that's a really important point you made. I'm glad you made that. ASHRAE is an important organization. It's independent. It's a distributive technology. It's a distributed organization, right? It's responding to what's going on in the world. And quite frankly, whoever sits in the presidential chair the government presidential chair doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that people need to understand is that the political voice is not the voice of engineering sciences.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
It'll never be the voice. I mean, I'm sure I might join along, but the fundamentals, the principles of physics and chemistry, the things that we know that exist all around us, exist regardless of political voices. That we'll never be able to deny, ever.
Let's go back to my favorite engineers, the Romans, right? The issues they were struggling with are the same issues we're struggling with today, right? How do I heat and cool a place? How do I build a bridge? How do I build a building?
Absolutely.
These things are universal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes. And it will be like this the next many years, because people will live in buildings.
Yeah.
Else we cannot survive.
Yeah. And also, ASHRAE, quite frankly, in my opinion, is a force for good, because it's moving the needle. The standards matter. They get adopted. The committee work matters. It's grindy work, but it does have beneficial outcomes, right? It's just a slow moving train, but it works.
Yes, it is slow movement. We're trying several times to speed up some of the things. But as I mentioned earlier, our industry is also slow moving.
Yeah.
Not always because of ASHRAE, but it is slow moving. So
yeah, there's a lot of path dependency. Okay, so it's gone midnight where you are in Cyprus. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Having you on was really important for us, because who you are and the work you've done and the organisation you represent, they are all reasons on their own that we would want to speak to you. But I'm so grateful that you came on, and I wish you the very best going forward.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'd like to
pleasure.
I'd like to echo that. And one thing that people again need to know is that within the hour discussion, we really haven't captured all of the things that you've influenced over the world. That will be one of your legacies, I think, Bjarne, and you'll definitely join the ranks of those that came before you. And yeah, it's been an honor having you on.
Thanks, both.
Okay, thank you. Well, what can you say? I was really, really impressed. Anyone that can rock a bow tie and head up an international organization, that's my man.
Yeah. When you get to, even when you just first meet him, you understand how humble he is. He really is a humble individual. When you think about the things that he's accomplished in his career, these aren't small feats at all.
No.
We didn't even talk about his actual practical skills. Like, he's a practitioner.
Yes.
He's worked on many buildings around the world, the engineering part of it, right? And he still to this day gets called in to do very difficult projects. So we didn't even touch that.
Wasn't he involved on Bangkok Airport with Peter Simmons at some point?
Yeah, he was, yeah. We didn't talk about his early research work. He worked with a company called Bjarne Carroll, I think it was. It was a Danish instrumentation company. So almost all of the current instruments that are used for post-occupancy surveys, either at a research level or actually on situ or in situ, he worked on the early sensors. So there's, people running around with, thermal sensors, black bulb temperature sensors, data loggers, he did that stuff decades and decades ago. We didn't even touch on that. So yeah, what a great guest to have on.
I kept thinking that, you look back in history, any history, but you look back in the history of our business, so he has touched greatness. He's worked with Dr. Fanger, right? That guy's never going to not be in the history books, right? That's like working with Benjamin Graham or Warren Buffett. It's just, and that's someone who's worked with them, interacted, they've exchanged ideas and written papers together. That is just amazing.
Well, yeah. So when you think about, like he mentioned two guys, Gaggy and Nevins, and, those are some of the forefathers, as is Bedford and these other guys from the UK. But he also was touched by guys like Professor Rolls. And Rolls worked with the Gemini space program. He was a psychologist, and his job was to send the chimpanzees up into space and bring them back down and then do studies on. Well, when his role at NASA was done, he moved over to Kansas State University, which is where Nevins and Fanger and all. So he's in the higher, not the hierarchy, but the chain. The DNA chain of thermal comfort. He's one of the links. No,
that was a good interview. I really enjoyed that. I could have spoken to him for ages. Now, I liked, people don't understand how big and bureaucratic an organization like ASHRAE is, right? I've done some committee work on ASHRAE. It's grinding work, right? It's no question about it. But, that institution matters. How many countries across the world adopt their standards?
Yeah, that's all over. And that's another thing that we didn't talk about is that, Bjarne, going back to the ASHRAE, but, Bjarne also works with REVA. Yeah. He also, works with CIBSE in the UK. So if you take the membership of REVA and the membership of CIBSE and then the membership of ASHRAE, throw in the architectural institutes, that's just North America and the UK and the Nordic parts. But then you toss in the Asian countries and now also the Middle East. Yeah. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people that are involved in the development of these types of standards all over the world. And it is a big machine. And it is, but he used a good word, and that is conservative. And when it comes to standard development, it is a very deliberate process. Like there's no leap of faith, you know? Yeah. These standards are based on research work. So what happens is that somebody will be in a committee. They'll say we have a shortage of knowledge. A call for research work will go out. It'll then and there'll be funding for that. And ASHRAE have millions of dollars that they spend every year on research work. The research work gets done. Oftentimes it takes several years to get that published. That then gets adopted or brought into the committee. It's presented to a committee of peers. It gets reviewed. It gets challenged. And then finally it gets into adoption. And so it's a deliberate process. And so the conservative element of ASHRAE is done for a reason. And that is that when people like ourselves, practitioners, use the standards, we have to know that it's based on good, solid science.
Yeah,
and that takes time.
It's like an academic peer-reviewed thing, right? There's a process there. It's meant to be rigorous because it has to stand up to public scrutiny, ultimately, right? It's got to stand up to something.
Yeah.
Now, that was interesting. My big takeaway, actually, was why the why matters. I can't stop thinking about that. That point you made about there's almost like a production line element sometimes where you're just in there grinding away and you're not thinking about why is it important that I make this detail, this floor plan connecting with this window, why I do that well. Because for the next 25, 40, 50 years, if it's leaking, it matters, right? No one thinks like that. We got to get back to the why. The why has been lost in our business.
Yeah. And I think that's, one of the things that ASHRAE brings to the table, and certainly Bjarne, because his whole career has been all about figuring out the why. But we have to find a way to get that other person across the desk from us that maybe doesn't have a role on our side of the table, but we can play a role to help them on their side of the table. Yeah. And that makes them better technicians. It makes them a more conscientious designers and installers and manufacturers, and I think ASHRAE have a role to play in that. We just have to figure out how to do it.
I'd like to speak to some more people at ASHRAE, like the head of the Female Engineering Society at ASHRAE, because, again, it'd be interesting to get her take. But, the thing, when you first mentioned this podcast about doing this interview, I was just super impressed because I sort of lost touch with ASHRAE a bit. I had no idea they had a Danish guy as the head of ASHRAE. That immediately got my attention because I just assumed it'd be an American guy, right?
Yeah. Well, he may be. Now, we should have asked him this question. I believe there was one other president before him many, 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 many years ago that played the presidential role. But we'd have to get corrected on that.
I'm pretty sure it was a British guy. I vaguely remember a Brit being head of ASHRAE for one term.
Yeah. That could definitely be. Yeah. How appropriate that his very first ASHRAE meeting was in Halifax, Canada. Here we are, a couple of Canadians.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
I'm a plastic Canadian.
But how appropriate, right? That we did have him on talking to us as Canadians when his first meeting was in Halifax, which is anybody that's never been to Halifax, you have to go to Halifax. It's an awesome place.
That's it. I'll say that. It's a big world out there. You should not, and this is, again, a bit of a trait in our industry, thinking locally. Yes, real estate is local, but the engineering world is global, man. There's so much going on out there.
Yeah.
If you don't have a global perspective, in my opinion, you're really harming your career and development. You got to think outside of your immediate country. You should be looking to other countries to see what they're doing, right?
Yeah. We keep talking about we're going to have a business podcast one of these days, but I think it was Peter Drucker. Was that Peter Drucker or Tom Peters, somebody like that? Yeah. I was reading one of their books, and they were talking about what happens to individuals that become so stodgy and so fixed in their beliefs that they can't see anything outside of what's in their own blinders. And the question they ask is, what if you're wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the best thing you can hear when you have a conversation with someone and they say, "Oh, I don't really know," that means they're intelligent, in my opinion. Right, because they're not stuck in their orthodoxy. There's no mental atrophy going on there.
Right.
The older I get and the more people I get, the more I realize I'm a bit of a moron. And my quest is to try and squash that as much as possible and just meet more people and try and understand more things. But the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. Right. That's been my discovery as I've gone on in life.
Yeah. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but there was the 4 stages of learning where you have unconscious incompetence, then you have conscious incompetence, and then you have conscious competence, and then you have unconscious competence. Basically, when you're born, you don't know you can do squat. You don't know that you can drive a car. You don't know that you can't play guitar. You don't know that you can solder a pipe together, right? You don't know that you can't engineer a building. You don't know what you don't know. And then when you start to understand, so let's say you're going to start to learn how to drive, then you get in the first accident, you probably stole your dad or mom's car and you get into an accident, you realize what you don't know, right? Yeah. And then when they let you drive again after you've been punished severely, right? Then you develop your skills, and then you know what you know about driving, and then ultimately you end up getting into a car, you turn the keys with your cell phone and your coffee and your makeup and whatever, right? And you get people running down the driveways down onto the freeways driving without thinking about it. They've gone from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. And the problem is that when you're in the first stage and the last stage, you're out of the learning stage. You need to always operate in your life in stage 2 and stage 3, and always striving to go back to stage 2, knowing what you don't know. That's where you need to live your life.
And I think a lot of engineers get very comfortable and they start not wanting to take risks, not wanting to look outside their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of that.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
And there's no reward for taking a risk in our business, right? The guy that tries to, or girl that tries to design a radiant cooling system or chill beam system, that person is going to get resistance in North America from every design partner in their business. Everyone will tell them it won't work. The contractors won't want to put it in because the skills for that are not there. So why would that person do it? Why not just go with the old catalog out and pick some VAVs and fan coil units?
Rooftop unit.
Yeah. Get a rooftop unit, get a big gas out there. Boom, done, right? The incentive structure is so screwed up. It really is so screwed up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to sound like a whiny old man, but sometimes you do want to put a bullet through your head when you see these things.
But, one of the things that, in this podcast, one of our objectives here is to bring leaders on to the show and get their vision. And when you think about the people we've had on to date, Peter Simmons, a world leader in radiant designs, Bjarne Olesen, the guy we just talked to, a world leader in radiant designs. And we see that those that are globally based in leadership positions get high performance enclosures, dedicated ventilation systems, natural materials on the inside, and radiant-based heating and cooling systems.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. We live in an interesting world. Anyway, that was a good interview. So I shall see you on the next one.
Adam, always a pleasure, man.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. Also, if you would like Robert or Adam to speak, teach, or consult on your project or business, please email admin@edificecomplexpodcast.com. See you next time.